Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. Welcome to a homegrown family. I'm your podcast host, Joe Metler. Thank you for joining here today. I'm going to try something here a little fun for you guys. Maybe it'll be interesting. But there's one time I attended NDSU and I had a speech class. And we were supposed to do a presentation / informative type of speech, right? And my topic was going to be entomology and pinning insects, because that's something I did as a 4-H person, individual. I entered myself into the entomology, or the study of bugs, category, and I always pinned his insects and preserved them and put them in a box. And so that was kind of a thing I did. So I'm like, oh, well, I can do a presentation on something I know about already, being how to pin and preserve an insect. So I started this speech off in a certain way. And so, here it is. All right, here we go. Crikey, there he be, the big North American pocket gopher. There he is. You don't normally get to see him in the daylight. There he be, 6 to 10 inches long, with bloody claws there that are used for digging. It's about an inch, maybe a ½ inch long. So, today we're talking about the American pocket gopher. Joined in today, I have my brother David, because he is my partner in crime when it came to trapping pocket gophers.
Glad to be here. Should be fun.
Yeah. We learned how to trap pocket gophers from my dad. Pretty young age. We were out there 7, 8 years old, probably, maybe even a little younger, carrying around the bag of gophers while dad did the work, and then eventually told us and showed us how to do it. But before we get into all of that, a quick introduction, I guess, to my brother David, for those of you guys who have not listened to previous episodes and are kind of jumping in here. David is my brother underneath myself. I have 4 younger ones underneath him yet. So David's kind of my partner in crime throughout life, actually, really. He went to NDSU along with myself. He got a major in horticulture, stayed there to produce his master's in plant sciences, and now he works over at a sugar beet co-op. And so he's kind of been a plant guy at heart his whole life, and I'd say he's also kind of like an amateur orchardist, vineyardist, whatever you want to call it, something like that. So he deals with plants, I deal with plants. You heard his voice on this podcast before, but we have him here again today. I think that's about it, right, Dave? Pretty accurate?
Sounds like a good introduction.
But you want the full introduction, you'll have to check out a different episode. I think it's called Seeds and Such or something like that. I think he gave them full spectrum of his background. So pocket gophers. First thing we want to get into is, what are the pros and cons of pocket gophers? So remember that David and I come from an agricultural background. And so coming from that perspective, I'll cover some of the pros, David, if you want to cover some of the cons.
Sure.
All right. So pros of pocket gophers. From an environmental standpoint, I had a double major. My second major was natural resource management. So I get a little bit of this perspective sometimes. A pocket gopher, goes and burrows in the soil and everything. And it aerates the soil, kind of alleviates some compaction and things like that you might occur, say in a prolonged grazing sense, in a pasture where it's just, compacted throughout time. A gopher might be able to dig a hole down there and aerate a little bit of the soil in kind of a micro environment, kind of similar way that a cow's manure pile might cause a little bit more nutrients in that one little spot. So kind of to that extent of the benefit. Other than that, I don't see a lot of benefits to pocket gophers. So, David, what do you got for me?
Joe said it's a micro benefit to having that aeration there. So unless you're going to have a prairie dog city, it's probably not going to be a lot of aeration that's really, beneficial to a field on a whole. The cons are on the livestock side of things, potentially, having a cow or a sheep or a goat or something get its foot stuck in a hole and, break its ankle or something. Along the con side of equipment would be some of those gopher mounds get rather large, and that could jostle you pretty good if you hit it with your tire. But also if you, run your knives or something from your disc bind in there, you could be hitting rocks or dulling up your blades. So it's really not very good on the equipment, and that's probably the big reason we were going after the gophers on our farm.
I think on top of that, too, that gopher mound takes up a 2 by 2 foot area. I mean, that's less forage in your pasture, too, so it's less that your cows are able to eat and consume.
Right, and it's not just one hill per gopher either, right? I mean, a gopher generally will have, half a dozen hills in a line, so you're not like you're going to miss it with your equipment.
Yeah, no, it's pretty prominent in some areas, especially where they haven't been touched a whole lot, where there isn't grazing going on, but like a forest edge or something like next to a pasture, they can sometimes, have, a whole colony almost over there. I said colony, but I read something the other day, David, actually preparing for this podcast, and it actually said that they're pretty solitary. For some reason, they kind of dig deep and kind of live by themselves, unless they go to try to find a mate or something, and then they have a little rugrat of gophers hanging around, and then they multiply and spread out, and it gets a bigger and bigger colony, kind of like your prairie dog towns, but usually there's not quite that many. Maybe it's because we're trapping them.
Could be.
But yeah, so we talked a lot about the type of farm that we grew up on, a little bit here in other episodes, and kind of the farm that my dad grew up on. So we have beef cows, and one of the things that we do to help support our beef cows, our dad's beef cows, is that we have hay ground. And so, like David mentioned, we run tractors. We had a sickle mower for a long time. That, oh man, you hit a gopher mound with a sickle mower, and then you break a sickle, and then it's a whole ordeal on how to pull that sickle bar out and replace, one or two knives on it. And it's so many times, that Dad and I were out there just pulling and working on those bolts and things. You put lock nuts on them things, and so it's just got to grind one off in order to put a new blade on and a new sickle on and stuff. And disc bines do a little bit better job, but it still dulls your blade. Wear and tear on your equipment. So that's why we were told to go out there and trap gophers as kids. As we kind of get into this gopher trapping thing, some might wonder, well, what do you all need? Like, what does this all entail? And so play along here with me, David, as I kind of go through some of this. But, you need a trap, obviously. And then depending on the type of trap that you use, may determine whether or not you need a board to cover your hole or not. So we usually have a board, probably like a 8-inch by 12-inch or 12 by 12 piece of wood, just an old plywood piece or something like that we use to cover the top of the hole after we put the trap in. And then you also need a stake, something to anchor your trap into, so that way the gopher just doesn't take it and run away with it or something. Or a fox or something comes by. It's probably the more likely chance, like a fox or something or a coyote comes and takes away the gopher, taking your trap with it. So it's important to stake down your trap. You also need a shovel to dig your hole, to find the gopher's hole. And I think that's almost about it. Am I missing something?
Mode of transportation.
Mode of transportation. And David and I were the fortunate ones where our parents, and again, going back to those previous episodes, did a lot of horsebacking and things like that to get from to and from places and to help chase around the cows and move them around from pasture to pasture. And so our dad didn't really believe in having a UTV or a four-wheeler or anything to transport ourselves to go trap gophers.
And also way too young to drive a truck because, again, we were, maybe 10 by the time we were doing it by ourselves. So, yeah, we were biking on gravel roads, carrying all of this equipment. Multiple miles to go to these fields. We developed some technique.
Yeah. So, when we first started off, Mom and Dad would get home, and then Mom would go drop us off in the field, and on the way back home from work, Dad would come by and pick us up in the field, and then we kind of coordinated that a couple times, and eventually, we're like, once got more confidence in us riding our bicycles, that we decided, oh yeah, we could do this. And I remember we had one bicycle, was Dad's green single speed. It wasn't a Schwinn, was it?
Yeah, it was a Schwinn.
Was it Schwinn? Okay. That thing, I'm pretty sure is still in the barn, and probably works if you grease up the chain a little bit. But this thing had the handlebars that kind of came up a little bit and kind of curved towards you just slightly. And we were able to take our shovel, our spade. And so the spade is more of like an elongated shovel, 4 or 5 inches wide and goes down about 1.5 feet versus like your sand shovel or what you might typically see. So it was a more narrow, long shovel. But it was only a 5-foot shovel, and we were able to stick the handle on the one end, and then the shovel would sit almost across in front of the other handlebar, so you wouldn't have to carry your shovel. So you'd be biking around with the shovel on your bicycle. So we have that shovel on there, and then
we also used fiberglass stakes to hold down our traps, which were very flexible. So you're able to stick those through the handle of the shovel and then around to the blade of the shovel, and they were able to wedge them in there so they wouldn't fall off. When we did that, we stuck the traps through the stake also, so you'd hang the traps from the stakes and the shovel. So one guy had the shovel, the stakes, and the traps. So a little bit of weight sometimes if you had a lot of traps going on one side of your bike. But then the other guy had the unfortunate task of trying to carry all these boards. And if you're carrying around like 6 boards on your bicycle, trying to hold them on your handlebar is not very easy.
There's probably times we had like five at a time trying to carry them things. And so I usually had the one bike that had everything in the front. Maybe that's unfortunate for David because he usually got stuck with the boards. But I'd always hold on to 1 or 2 boards because the shovel up front kind of helps stabilize the boards a little bit. David had 1 or 2 to hold on to also. And then eventually we also got a little basket kind of on the back of the Schwinn also. It was only 2 inches deep by basically like a 9x13 pan. That was kind of a wired mesh cage thing that we put on the back, and we were able to put 2 or 3 boards back there also. So we had quite the mode of transportation, I guess you could say. And between some of the locations, we went, 2 miles out and 2 miles back, to get to some places to trap gophers. And sometimes you get 1, sometimes you get 5, and sometimes you biking around for the fun of it.
Yeah.
But I guess the good news is that if you went back and you didn't catch a gopher, you didn't have to bring any traps back with you. So at least you didn't have that.
Yeah, there's that. Fortunately, that meant you were back and bike there the next day then.
Yep. And if you're out there trying to catch like 2 gophers from a neighbor, and there's only 2 gophers out there, sometimes you put 2 or 3 traps in the same group of mounds, and it takes a while to get them. But all right, so we have the shovel, mode of transportation, stakes, traps, boards. That's pretty much it. And then the technique, which is very important. But before we move off on more trap type stuff, we started off with a couple of different type of traps. And some of this is probably based on what Dad kind of learned and as we developed it over time. But I remember we always started out with these traps that are called a DK-1 gopher trap. Has the death clutch, it's supposed to squeeze them. You usually don't get a live gopher in your trap. So it's kind of an interesting thing, and I'll post a link to it in the show notes here, but it's basically as a gopher is digging through his tunnel, if you can imagine that. Gopher's digging through his tunnel, and he's pushing dirt and stuff around, and his paws will hit this spring-loaded plate, basically. And as it's pushing, this plate will eventually release the spring, and then up around him, it'll usually squish his head or his stomach with these like death grips, claws or jaws, I think they call them. You take a look at the picture that I'll post, and you'll get a bit better idea of what that actually means. But that's basically kind of how it worked. And in order to set this thing, you had to spin the spring around a couple times, lay it flat, and grab this little trigger piece of metal and stick it in on the metal flat piece that they push. As soon as they push that, then it would release, and then they get them. So it was kind of difficult for a little 10-year-old to get enough strength sometimes to wind that up and line it up while holding it, with your fingers and this and that. It was kind of an ordeal. I don't know, Dave, you got into a little bit of those, didn't you?
I was never any good at it.
So then I kind of did it for a little while, and then we could use this other gopher trap called the Duke long spring traps. It's kind of a typical design for more like a it is described as a gopher trap, but also for like weasels and minks and other small rodents that are walking along. You can kind of cover it up on the surface with leaves, and then you'll step in it, and it'll kind of slap shut, If you ever saw like the Fox and the Hound Disney movie as a kid, the hunter was out there trying to trap the fox, and granted, his had like teeth on it. Ours were like no teeth, just straight metal. It just flapped over with no teeth or anything. But that's kind of the general gist of the style trap that it is. The DK-1 death clutch traps, I found out that they're been a design that's been around since about 1917. And they're like $4 or $5 a trap. You can buy cases of 12, and all sorts of good reviews on those things. It works really well. Hardly ever get a miss, and things like that. And I don't know about that. I think one of the reasons we moved over from the DK-1 gopher traps to the spring traps was that we got less plugs, and so a gopher will usually, if it senses something's wrong, so as soon as it starts pushing on that little metal flap, that's going to trigger, right? As soon as it starts touching that, and realizes something's wrong, or maybe it touches the jaws that are going to close onto him first before it gets to the pusher piece, then it might sense that trap's there, and it'll just backfill your hole with dirt, and then, that's how it goes. And then you try digging it out, resetting the trap. Whereas I feel like the spring traps, you can kind of set in an area that has multiple holes leading into it. With the DK1 gopher traps, they're meant to be like in a singular tunnel. If you're digging around trying to find the hole, oftentimes you dig in there and you'd find 2 or 3 holes. Like you hit a junction in the mound or in his system of tunnels, and then you have to set 3 of these, DK1 traps in there because it's only good for like a single tunnel. Whereas the Duke Longspring traps, ones that kind of snap shut to get their feet and things, you can put right in the middle of this junction. And so I feel like our likelihood of catching gophers were a lot better when they can kind of come in at 3 different spots, and things like that. So.
Yeah, so sometimes you get a nice, interesting tunnel network where you have holes coming from different directions that you just dug up. It's not going to be a good set. Sometimes we just filled them back in and picked a different mound.
Yep. So yeah, that's kind of long and short about what y'all need. I kind of went into a little bit of mechanics of why traps are maybe better or worse. I guess one of the, not so humane things about the one trap is that with the Duke long string traps that we switched to, so I guess I was going to mention that they are basically a trap that's been used by trappers and things for ages here, like for a long, long time. As far as they didn't get started getting mass produced to like the 1800s, but they're a trap that typically kept the animal alive, so that way they can go ahead and not injure a whole lot of the coat, or the fur or anything like that for getting sent to be traded and things like that. So anyways, when the gopher steps into this trap, it's more like stepping into it rather than pushing through it. And he'll step into it and usually catch its 2 front paws. Is usually what happens. If you have a good set, it'll trap its 2 front paws in there, and the gopher's 80% of the time probably still living when we catch it. And then what do we do, David?
And then you are very careful and make sure that you don't let the gopher go or anything when you're trying to get him out of the trap. But what you do is you take the trap out of the hole and grab the gopher's tail, then release the trap so it releases his front feet, and you have the board laying there, and all you do is you swing the gopher around real fast like a windmill and smack him on the ground on that board so you kill him.
Yeah, pretty quick. Goes for a little coaster ride first, but
yeah,
that's the way we were taught. Later in life, maybe due to certain reasons or circumstances, we started doing it a little bit differently, in that I learned that you can actually just take your stake that you use to set the trap in there to hold the trap in. You could use that to, whack the gopher over the head, just say bluntly. But the reason we learned this, or why I questioned why we do it the way we do it, is one time, we bike our 2 miles, we're trying to catch this gopher, and this has been one, if I remember right, has been one that's been problematic. It's been a while since we caught one. And so we had some lake friends there that had like 2 acres. We hayed their field, and so we're trying to catch gophers for them. So we're out there, and we catch a gopher. And it's kind of a weird thing. Must not have been a very good set, because we ended up, the 2 pieces of metal ended up squishing up between his back legs, like up by his gut, by his back. So it wasn't the front feet that were caught, it was the back feet, basically. And so the tail, is by the back feet. And so at this point in time, you couldn't really do anything in terms of being able to grab a tail without letting the gopher go. And so I'm like, oh, well, all I got to do, this is the way we always done it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I can be faster than a gopher. Like, by the time that gopher even knows that I released him, I will have that tail, and it won't even be an issue. David's with me on this, and he didn't question this one bit.
Yeah, I was questioning it in my head.
So I'm like, I can do this. It won't be no problem. At this point, I'm probably like 16. It's one of our last years actually like trapping gophers. And I'm like, I can do this, no problem. You getting a little bit hot-headed here. I can do it, no big deal. And I step on this trap to release it, and then I just go for the tail. And as soon as I grab the tail, this gopher just somehow Stretch Armstrong, the toy, and just goes around and grabs my stinking finger. And I'm like, oh! So I let go of the tail, and it grabbed right at my middle knuckle on my ring finger on my right hand side, and it just stood there, and I'm like trying to shake this thing off. I'm just shaking my hand violently. I'm like, talk about a windmill. I'm doing a windmill. I'm like, get this thing off here. And it wasn't
the thing I've ever seen.
it wasn't letting go. So then I had to grab this thing, and I was like, at this point, I was pulling this gopher off my finger, and eventually I think it might have just started losing air from me squeezing it to get it off. But finally, this gopher got let go, and then we just grabbed that stake after and just was like whacking this thing over the head. And
I think you grabbed the shovel.
Maybe I didn't care what I grabbed. I knew I was grabbing something. Oh man, that was a little intense for a gopher day. But
so from that point on, we didn't try to be tricky. If their back feet were caught, we just hit them with the stake. And it must have been before you were 16 because we weren't driving the truck. So it must have been more like 15 or 14 or something like that.
Probably closer to 14, But I got that little scar right there still hanging out on my finger. A little, like a K mark. I don't know. Must not detach all the skin, just bit a hole. And
they have pretty sharp teeth in case we didn't mention that.
Yeah, if Steve Irwin in the beginning of this intro didn't mention anything about their teeth, they're I mean, any parent out there knows when their kid makes a gopher face. It's I mean, I don't know how you describe them, but they're big and yellow and they're quarter to half inch long, with big overbites, But one of the more beneficial things from getting gophers is that at the end of the day, we were able to take a knife and cut off the tail and turn into the county and be able to turn the tail in for $1. $1 a tail.
Yeah, and depending on the county you were in, though, right? So our county was $1 for the tail. There were other counties that did $1 or $2, maybe even, for feet. So some of them required you to collect different things on the gopher. Not really sure why there was a difference.
They did 2 front paws over in, I think, Morrison County and Todd, where my folks reside. It was $1 a tail. And I remember a couple years in a row, I think we were getting to the point where we were able to get, I think, almost 100 gophers a season or two back to back, pretty close.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yep, it was getting pretty. We're getting pretty good at it, and the neighbors were finding out that these kids were doing it, and so we'd bike over, another mile the other direction and go to that neighbor, and eventually when we got closer to that 15, 16 years old, and our neighbors had 4-wheelers, and so once we biked there, from there, we were able to grab their 4-wheeler, and drive all the traps around and stuff like that and things. So
perks of getting older.
Yeah. Yep. I think about driving that other direction. It was a lot more of a gravelly hill type situation. And there's one time we were driving back, and I don't know, I must have been kind of like that 12, 11 years old again. And so I got this bike with the shovel in the front, and we didn't catch any gophers. So I'm just kind of driving on my way back, going down the hill, and kind of you get the washboards, that can develop on gravel roads and things. And I'm just kind of coasting down the hill, and it's gravel, but the Schwinn handles it pretty well. And I start doing little zigzags back and forth, little 3-foot turns going back and forth, kind of going down the hill. And all of a sudden, my turns got faster and faster and faster, and all of a sudden, my front tire spins all the way around, does a 180, and next thing you know, I'm going head over heels, hit my crotch on the steering bar, and fall into the ditch. And I'm just laying there. I'm not really hurting that bad, but I'm just laying there, just sitting there. Oh, golly. And then David's behind me, rolls up in his little bike and goes, I forget, do you remember what you said?
I don't, but I'm remembering this right now, and it was hilarious.
But you look at me, and you're like, oh, how did you do that? And he was just laughing like crazy at me, and he's just giggling away. And I look up at him, and I'm like, oh, you better keep on biking. So he just kept on going. Because if he was still laughing when I got up, oh, man.
Yeah, memorable moments. I don't think I ever got injured. Something to note, too, here is we weren't riding mountain bikes on these soft gravel roads. Mountain bikes would have been great. These were street bikes. They're not like the real narrow racing bike tires, but they're just a smooth tire with not any tread on it.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of any other gopher stories, but I did want to circle back a little bit, though. And because I feel like someone listening is going to be like, well, how do you find the hole? So A lot of this how to set the trap stuff, it's really hard to explain over an episode on a podcast. There's definitely some technique to it, and you could probably Google it. Maybe I'll find some fun YouTube videos we can kind of show. But typically, you trap the gophers starting in the early spring when the ground thaws. The gophers are super active, and then they'll probably start dying down come mid-July. I feel like they start doing less activity for the year, unless you've caught a gopher there and they, one comes in and moves in and takes its place, and then all of a sudden you see some new holes or something, or new mounds. But these mounds don't have open holes. And so there's two methods, I feel like, to finding the hole on a gopher mound. And one is to take the stake, kind of push, go up and down, push it in the dirt 2 or 3 inches until you hit a soft spot on the mound, and you're like, oh, well, there's a hole. So that should work out pretty good. And from there you can dig. And oftentimes I feel like you'll get a situation if you do that you'll hit a tunnel right in the middle of a tunnel, right? Because that's basically where you put yourself, is in the middle of a tunnel, because that's what you felt the stake. And then that'll oftentimes result in needing 2 of those DK1 gopher traps to cover up the tunnel, get both directions. That situation, you'll take a board, and you'll leave a little bit of a light at the end of the board, because then the gopher will be like, oh, why am I seeing light in my tunnel? And so then it'll want to go up a tunnel, and then it'll want to plug that hole in it. So it's thinking about that while it's going and pushing through this trap. And then with the other traps, you cover up the mound completely, so it's completely dark, so they can't see it. They're stepping into the trap. But going back to how to find the hole, usually if you're looking at a gopher mound, it's a little mound of dirt. But usually there's like a little half moon shape in the dirt somewhere where they close their tunnel up. And so you can see that, and then from there, you go back a couple inches, and we just drive our spade in there, and then you're going to find the hole eventually. And if you don't find it with the first couple little shovels full, you back up another couple inches, and you dig a couple more mounds, dirt out of there, and eventually you'll find the intersection where there's 2 or 3 tunnels leading to the same spot. But yeah, so that's kind of the way that works out. And so you cover up the whole entire mound, so that way they can't see what they're stepping into. A couple different methodologies there depending on what trap you use and things like that. But I don't know, David, is that anything else to add in terms of gopher trapping?
No, I think that about covers it. I still get, some memories and reminiscence when I'm at work and out in these fields, and there's some gophers out there, and I just really want to go and get them. But unless they're in my research plots, I leave them alone.
Our brother Michael actually had a gopher in his yard not too long ago and borrowed a trap and got him, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and the younger brothers did do a little bit of gopher trapping, but not near as much as what we did.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know if they went around to the neighbors or not, but once we cleaned them out of our folks' place, we go back the next year and be like, there've been no gophers, and okay, well, we're going to get our bucket tail, so we go over to the neighbors and say, hey, you need any gopher trap? It's kind of like a little business almost in the summertime for $100 for probably a penny an hour. One of these times, maybe I'll too, is post a little video. Granted, there's probably not much for gophers out there right now, or my dad's trapped them already this spring. I may post on Instagram here one of these times. Follow me at a homegrown fam on Instagram, and maybe I'll post a video here come next spring showing how to set these traps. Otherwise, I'll post a couple links on my show notes. You can kind of take a look at that. And there's one video that I found I'm going to post that actually shows a gopher digging a hole. Wow, they are a lot faster than I thought they were going to be. Like, they get down 6 inches in no time. Like, that's pretty quick. It's pretty incredible animals. Unfortunately, they pose pests to a lot of different farmers and their crops and their hay fields and things. So not very great for farmers, and that's why we trap them. Brought home a lot of good childhood memories growing up as far as gopher trapping went. So yeah, if you have any comments, questions, leave me an email at homegrownfam@gmail.com or follow me on Instagram and kind of stay tuned. But yeah, also, I guess I've mentioned this in the introduction here also, is that I'm going to try to post episodes, every week. This one here has been more like 2 weeks, but I'm more like not a bi-weekly podcast, more like a semi-weekly. So sometime within the 7 to 14 days, range is kind of where you'll see me post episodes. So I won't be offended if you're looking every single day for an episode. Appreciate that. But also apologize if you're looking to see one every week. I won't always get there one every week. This last week we had my anniversary, and then I went to the state fair and enjoyed some foot-long corn dogs and things. So at Minnesota State Fair, it's a lot of people, but a lot of good things, a lot of good soil science exhibits, a lot of good beekeeping exhibits. The University of Minnesota has a really good section on orchards, wine, have apples to grow, and things like that. So great place to go. Check out the horticulture building. I like to spend some time there when I go. So anyways, I don't know, Dave, have you ever been to State Fair? As kids, we did, 4-H stuff, but
Yeah, just when I was 15 was probably the last time I was there, so it's been a little while.
yeah, so we went as 4-Hers, probably sixth grade through senior year or something like that. But otherwise, I've been, I don't know, twice now in 6 years or something like that. It's kind of fun going as an adult. It's a lot of walking, but you get to see some cool things. You actually take in more informational things than what you did in the past. So, anyways, yeah. Thank you, everybody. This next weekend, David and I are going to be pressing some grapes. About that time of year now where we're going to be harvesting a lot of our grapes, trying to get some buyers on our grapes still. But, yeah, we used to sell to a local winery here by my folks' place. And, yeah, so we're going to be doing that, pressing. I'll definitely post some videos on Instagram for that. So stay tuned on some of the pressing process coming up. Otherwise, thank you, David, again for joining us here today. See you.